Thank you for your presentations. First, I want to make a request to Harriet. Could we please have circulated your presentation? The reason is that you've given us very good trends in your country, which have informed your policy decisions over time. Unfortunately, where we come from, I come from Uganda, I'm Jod Kachitahi, we are about 20 or 30 years behind that trend. The problem being that, like with technology, we are still lagging behind. And despite meetings and conferences like this, we still get people good friends who want to help us, coming around and encouraging us even to redesign policies to encourage production of the things that sell quickly. And sometimes it's those high-value foods which contribute significantly to even the consumption of the population. Maybe I modify the request. You better distribute it to even those friends who want to come and help us, so that we're also up to date with the trends and issues. The reason I'm saying this, at national level, that's where the distortions usually occur. But I want to be witness to what Cheryl just said. I happen to come from some village where Africa worked. And I used to try to help in combating malnutrition at the place, and I failed over years. One time I took students there to show them the malnutrition we have, and it wasn't there. Africa had been working just the way she presented to us, through participation, translation of the national policy, which we have, and designing programs and the interventions that were based on what the communities brought out. And it worked. I'm witness to this, Cheryl. It's not out of the blue. And relating it to scaling up, I think in yesterday where we were, to me it would make sense if programs like those of Africa, I think you're working about 4 or 5 places in Uganda, why don't you maintain those, sustain those, or rebuild on those? And there are so many others like that, so that life is simplified. We start looking for policy gaps that would reinforce that, so that the community participation and programming is done.
Okay, 2 more behind there, and we finish because we are supposed to leave here in the next 5 minutes. Can you give the gentleman there and the lady, and I think I will be done.
Thank you. Briefly, I'm Khalid Al-Harizi from IFAD. There's just one question regarding, I was trying to see what kind of sense it makes from the point of view of a developing government, assuming good political will, that each conference like this one will come up with an agenda, will try to have advocacy, will try to build its own capacities and so on. I think there is something that will not going to work. First of all, if only because there is scarcity of resources. So who is deciding on the priority from conference to conference or from donor to donor and all these kind of things? And at the same time, there is a common finding, which is institutions' capacity are weak. And we have to build them, and Gina example shows that it takes more than 3 years and things like that. So my question was about the method of work. Would it be interesting to focus for once on creating those capacities that in the institutions that are supposed to give us the outcomes, instead of each time deciding of a goal and all the kind of things and find out that at the end we don't have the capacities and the resources? And just a clue to that, I think we need to develop a leadership capacity at the grassroots levels. That's what I think Professor Arias was saying. Leadership capacities at grassroots level that create the demand at local level, that create the incentive for developing those capacities. Thank you.
The lady next to you.
Hello, I'm Pradnya from WFP India. I have basically two questions, but before that, I want to congratulate all presenters for their insightful presentations. The question specifically to Cheryl, your learnings were really very useful. The question is, you talked about gender analysis and also improvement in nutrition. You talked about inter-household kind of food security or nutrition issues. So if you have actually addressed intra-household level issues or distribution of food to improve the nutrition through your essential nutrition actions or so, I would really like to understand what the process which you followed. The second question goes to Manoj Kumar. Thank you so much for your insightful analysis of the situation and your thoughts. And I really liked when you said that empowering mothers to really recognize the nutritional status of their children it takes you long way in creation of the demand and the mothers asking for nutrition, the right nutrition, which is actually an approach which is quite appreciable. But then I was a little confused when you said that incentivization, which worked, especially in institutional deliveries and other programs, and then you are suggesting this. So I just wanted to know your thoughts, how it will be sustained and which approach, because these are two different and distinct approaches. So which approach, in your opinion, is better? Of course, I mean, I understand that this creating demand is quite time consuming and incentivization is an easy solution for some time, but from sustainability point of view, what from civil society perspective you will advise as a recommendation? Thank you so much.
Okay, so the team in front here, can you please report, Cheryl?
In response to the question regarding how did Nigeria incorporate nutrition into its national policy framework, that team, composed of nutritionists, health experts, agriculturalists, university professors, and NGOs, was very, very dynamic in the country. These were some of the most well-respected leaders in the country regarding agriculture and nutrition, and they were able to make a very compelling argument and provide compelling evidence to the government because they were so well respected. As I indicated, they started with the evidence base and looking at the profiles which you are aware of, which is outlining the statistics and the trends. And it's very difficult to argue that with Nigeria being an oil producing country with assets and resources, that the levels of malnutrition were so high, particularly in looking at the stunting rates of over 40%. And so when the national leaders were presented with the evidence base, which was neutral, which was scientific, which was collected in a very, very scientific way, they were not able to dispel the facts that malnutrition is indeed a problem in Nigeria. And so with that, the team proceeded to engage those at even higher levels in the ministries of agriculture, advocating at the Ministry of Health, at the National Planning Commission, at the National Finance Office, in arguing their case about why Nigeria needed to execute its national food and nutrition policy and why they then needed to proceed with the plan of action to implement that policy. That process took well over 3 years, but with the constant advocacy, and these people began to worry the government very much and proceeded. And so that's how that policy was eventually launched by the president. Okay. To answer the second question regarding the essential nutrition actions and gender analysis, we did proceed in that manner in promoting the essential nutrition actions and explaining why the mother needed access to additional calories during pregnancy, dietary diversity, why the girl child also needed access to an appropriate diet, to dietary diversity. And we ran into an enormous cultural pressure because it was counterculture, in that the man is eating first and then the boy child and then the woman. And we respected the culture, and that is why we had to bring men into the process in terms of our gender analysis and explaining gender. Because we were facing against the paradigm and the norms of the society and the mores of the society, and needing to explain to men. And we were only able to make small changes because it is a cultural cultural preference. But we were able to make some changes, and as you saw in the final analysis and in the final outcome, we were able to improve the underweight of girl children as well.
Thank you. That's great to do that kind of patient work, both of you.
Patience.
Yes. We've been doing it in our way, too. And I want to thank you also, Munarch, for showing how not only urban diets, where I come from, but also rural diets can change the farming system and change it much more directly in an interlinked way. And taking from that, the question of subsidies, that's not what I'm talking about. That's part of the old 50-year system. And the question of leakage of any kind of payments is one that is, I think, being handled and needs to be handled in a more general way. It's not. But what if you can pay farmers directly to manage ecosystem services, and if you can detach their livelihoods from the price that the consumer has to pay, by multiplying the ways that they get an income. They can get an income partly from the price, partly for providing public goods of good ecosystem services. They can receive it collectively. There are problems, I agree, but it is to break this dilemma between farmers needing a livelihood and low-income people needing low prices to be able to access food. If they can get it directly, that's one thing, but if they're operating in markets, then the price is a very crude instrument. There needs to be multiple instruments to try to facilitate all of that happening. I can't agree more that bottom up is it, and I can't, from the village in Uganda, we're in the north, they're learning from the south now about how to reconstruct these kinds of relations that have been taken apart through disembedded markets, and I can't agree more with the IFAD speaker as well, and I will add to that the priority of small farming is one that your organization has always had, and that we're trying to bring into public policy and actual practice in places where it's been lost.
Yep. Specifically, there was a question on the gender, and I think the point I was trying to make is political demand is the key element, no doubt, but malnutrition, ultimately, that's at least what we have been learning, is predominantly a gender issue. And sometimes to overcome the strong firewalls that gender issues create, for any effect to happen, we need to bring in certain incentives which allow the resistance to break. The classic two examples I was trying to give was one where we felt there was need, wherever the service was available, institutional deliveries to happen. And in most parts of rural India, where we did direct conversations with mothers, the ones who actually could go and access a decent institutional delivery was because their husbands allowed them to go, because they were guaranteed a government incentive in cash. So there is a need for bringing those innovative, government-driven, policy-driven, and which are sustainable, therefore. My examples were not civil society-led pilots where you have an incentive to experiment, where a policy change has happened, and where the service of the institutional delivery was working. In many cases, there was an incentive, but the service delivery didn't happen. There we found a tremendous difference in terms of the health of the newborn itself and the mother thereof. The second example, which we are beginning to see, again, all this is part of the nutritional survey we are carrying out and talking to women, which we call the Hunger and Malnutrition Survey, the Hangama Survey, which is led by the politicians. The second example that I'm seeing is the one where women tell that we know breastfeeding is important. We know that colostrum has to be given in the first 3 days. I mean, and we see it every day in front of us, animals doing it as well. So we know it very well, it's a traditional thing. But then we're not allowed to do it. The socio-economic structures are such that we have to be in the field. We are helping our small farmer husband to earn additional income. So one of the voices for the last many years that people across the country have been raising concern about it is to say that if the organized sector world over recognizes the concept of a maternity leave and that mothers should get 6 months leave, why shouldn't unorganized sector mothers who are extremely poor not have the equivalent access of a maternity leave? And it's been this voice for many years from across the country, to my mind, which has resulted in some experiments now by the government of India, which we actually went and saw, where there is the equivalent of a cash voucher transferred to these mothers' accounts in the form of the equivalent of a maternity wage, resulting in women and civil society groups having a voice to demand with the male counterparts that can now these women stay back and not be in the field from the 5th day of delivery. So there is a need for economic, systemic policy incentives to break the shackles of gender if you really want to tackle malnutrition beyond political demand. That was the point I was making.
Great. I think we have had a very good discussion, and I want to thank all the presenters, including myself, for the time that we have given. Seems that it is obvious that policies and the structures that we have can themselves be a means of exclusion of some people, but also, or some groups within the community, but also policies, and I think that's what Kumar has been saying, and incentives can also be part of changing behavior amongst the groups that we actually have been excluding. The other issue that seems to be coming out is that we need to give our farmers to pay them well for the products, but also to pay them for the public service that they may be offering in addition to their product. I liked that. I had not ever thought that I need to pay farmers for managing waste, for doing things that might actually help the environment in the process of them actually also producing products that we are consuming. The other thing is the issue of political demand, and I think Kumar and others have brought it out very well, as a means of empowering the bottom-up approach, because sometimes that's what lacks. One, being able to involve the politicians themselves, make them see, make them do the assessments, make them actually appreciate the problems that are down there and contribute to solving those problems, but even being able to help the women themselves have tools and means of recognizing the problems, participate in deciding the solutions to those problems, and actually solving those problems themselves. I think the example of Gina was one very good example that actually can be able to solve all these kind of things. But again, I think there is a conclusion that all these things we are talking about, they take time. There are no quick solving solutions that we've always been thinking within the 5 years of the project will have all the answers. As we've heard, it takes time. It takes time to convince politicians. It takes time to establish trust. And it actually takes time even to build capacity. I think our friend has talked about capacity in leadership. But knowing the kinds of leadership we have that are changing every day, and so it takes time to get the critical mass. And we need to invest in time, in patience, and also in solving some of these problems. Thank you very much. I want to invite you for lunch. Thank you very much.